Thank you everyone for joining us for this important discussion on what the Autism Services Funding Cliff is and talking a little bit about the gap between transition and adulthood. I want to draw everyone's attention to the handout tab in your control panel. There is a handout that was created, a guide with useful information and tips for parents of students of all ages in the transition process that will really assist in addressing this cliff, this gap in services. If you can, click it and download it just so you have it. If you have issues with that, please enter into the chat box that you're having issues and we'll be sure to connect with you. And if you're not able to download it, we will get you a copy. We want to make sure you get access to this valuable resource. Also, I just want to address a few things for this webinar so that everyone knows. One is that you will be able to hear us, but we're not going to be able to hear you. So if you have something to say, if you have a question, if you have a comment you'd like to make, the only way that we're going to be able to know is if you use the chat feature in your control panel. We will make sure to touch base with everyone who enters something into that chat feature. So please do so. If you have a thought, question, or feedback, your input is really important to us. Next slide, please. So Next for Autism is presenting today on the topic, or putting together, hosting a webinar today on the topic of the service gap between transition and adulthood. And we'll be introducing our presenter in a moment. But just in case you're not familiar with Next for Autism, we're a nonprofit that was founded in 2003, and we transform the national landscape of services for people with autism by strategically designing, launching, and supporting innovative programs. And we believe that individuals with autism have the potential to live fulfilling, productive lives when supported by excellent services and connected to their communities. And we continually ask here at Next for Autism, what is next for people on the autism spectrum? Next slide, please. And my name is John Bryson. I'm Senior Manager of Strategic Initiatives. So glad to be hosting this webinar today and connecting with all of you. And I'm thrilled to introduce you to our presenter, someone who I've known for several years and is literally one of my favorite people in the field. And I'm so excited to hear her speak today. Dr. Danielle Taylor is a nationally a New Jersey Department of Education certified school psychologist, and she's worked in public and private schools and clinical settings across the Northeast United States. Before serving as the current Assistant Director at Spectrum 360 in Northern New Jersey, Dr. Taylor led clinical service at the Yale School and Pineland Learning Center. Her person-centered, data-driven, outcome-based approach has laid the framework for these and various other programs to improve in meaningful ways. Dr. Taylor has spoken at state and national conferences, educational workshops to professionals and families on various related topics, including dyslexia, academic interventions, behavior management, psychoeducational assessment, and animal-assisted therapy. She serves on the New Jersey Association of School Psychologists Executive Board, ASSA, which is a statewide association of New Jersey private special education schools, and the National Association of Private Special Education Centers, or NAPSEC, if you're familiar. Dr. Taylor has earned a bachelor's in psychology from Hartwick College and a master's in science in educational psychology and statistics, also a doctorate in school psychology from the University of at Albany, and the New Jersey Department of Education supervisor certification through Montclair State University. She's an incredible mind in this field and has tremendous experience and input. And again, it's such a privilege for her to be speaking with us today and on this topic. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Taylor. Thank you so much for presenting for us today.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for the warm welcome and wonderful introduction. And also I want to say thank you to both you and Next for Autism on behalf of myself and everyone that's part of the Spectrum 360 community for this opportunity. I'm very proud to be the Assistant Director at Spectrum 360. We're an organization that provides supports and services for individuals beginning in preschool through adulthood, The people that we serve typically have autism or another associated developmental disability or associated support needs. And we provide our services a number of different ways, including through our 2 schools and also in our adult programs in Northern New Jersey. So again, thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be here today. And thank you to all of you who are joining us. It's again my pleasure to be able to share some information with you. So we're here today to talk about the gap in services and funding that occurs when someone transitions from a school-based setting to an adult setting. And what we see is this shift from a focus on entitlement to eligibility. Now, there are so many incredible resources that are out there available to families, to educators, to individuals that are making this transition or preparing to make this transition that provide a lot of specific details about what should happen and when it should happen. And as a result, we wanted to make sure that you, as our audience, had access to some of those amazing resources. So we've created the handout that you have to reference. But we decided that it would be better to approach this presentation a little bit differently, not go over those specifics, but talk about a strategy and a mindset for approaching transition. So what are some of the things that you should have in mind as you're thinking about your transition into adulthood or thinking about your child or your student's transition? So again, we're talking about the shift from entitlement to eligibility. Well, what is this? So when somebody is in school-based services, typically from the ages of 3 to 21, they are entitled through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to a free and appropriate public education. And that includes a lot of things. You know, bundled into that are things such as related services that the person might need. You know, of course, the individualized education plan includes what they're going to receive with regard to academic instruction. Transportation is included. All different things that are sort of part of this bundled package when you're in the entitlement phase in the education setting. When you move to eligibility in the adult world, it's a bit different. It's more, if you think of it more as an a la carte situation. So here you have to demonstrate that you're eligible for different kinds of services based upon your support needs to lead the most meaningful, independent life possible. So it is a different situation, and you're going to have to adopt some different strategies. So what's the difference between something that is an obstacle or an opportunity? Of course, there are a myriad of answers to this question, and it's meant to be somewhat rhetorical. But one of the key differences that I notice is it depends upon your level of preparation, right? So if I'm thinking about a literal physical cliff, if I'm just out there with nothing, I have no previous experience with climbing mountains or, you know, dealing with something like this, I have no equipment with me, I'm going to be rather ill-prepared for the situation, and it's going to present itself as an obstacle. But if, like the individual in the picture on the slide, I have equipment, I have previous experience, I have probably the support of a team, I've trained for this, practiced for this, then that cliff is no longer an obstacle, it becomes an opportunity. And so today, I'm going to share some strategies with you to help shift the mindset about this transition from something that's a serious challenge. And in no way am I minimizing some of the difficulties associated with the shift, but we can shift the way that we approach to also see this as an opportunity to help ourselves or the individuals that we support build their own system of supports that's more customized and individualized to them, and also supports their growth and independence and their entry into the adult world. One of the places that I really like to begin is I like to ask people to reflect and think about yourself. What are you carrying? And what are you bringing to the table in any of the work that you're doing to support others or yourself? So what are your expectations? What are your beliefs? Where did those expectations and beliefs come from? Are they coming from a growth mindset where you see any sort of challenge or setback as an opportunity to continue growing, evolving, improving? Or do you feel like that's a demonstration of, something that you can't change and you feel sort of stuck? It's really important to reflect upon these kinds of things because they have a substantial influence on the way that we interact with our world and with those around us. And certainly when we're talking about planning for the future, they will show up in the kinds of things that we anticipate and expect for others and also ourselves. So it's really important to start there. And also, in addition, to really make sure that you prioritize your own self-care, and not self-care in sort of a platitude kind of way, but really thinking about what are some strategies that you can incorporate to actively restore what's being depleted. It's so important because we can't support others or care for them if we don't take good care of ourselves as well. And further, these are really critical life skills that we can then help foster in the people that we support, whether they be our children, our students, colleagues, etc. So really think about, what are you carrying? What are you bringing into a situation? I also want to encourage you to reflect on your own experiences in general, and especially with regard to growing up. So how did you learn about what career options there were? How did you learn about what you liked? What was of interest to you? What was of value to you? And then think about how you can also create those opportunities for the people that you're supporting and the people that are in your life preparing for this transition. So I want to share a little bit with you about how I learned about the workplace. My very first job was in customer service. And I actually started very young. I started going to work when I was about a week old. And this is because my family at that time owned a business. They owned a car wash in Newark, New Jersey. And I went to work every day with my parents. This is actually a picture of me pretending to answer the phone. That wasn't my actual job. But I learned about all kinds of workplace interactions and so many things just by being in that environment and having that experience about those implicit workplace norms. And I did have a real job while I was there, just so you know. I actually sat there was a window where people would come to pay for their car washes. And after somebody paid for their car wash or other services, I would give them a piece of candy. So that was my early workplace experience, and I'm confident that it's had an influence on my development as a person and also vocationally. So think about those experiences that you've had. How did you learn about what your options were? How did you get experience and exposure with things that were of interest to you? How did you learn what you didn't like? So think about all of those things. And again, think about how can we facilitate the same sorts of opportunities for the people that we are supporting in preparing for the transition process. Above all else, we want to stay focused on what matters the most, which is the person. We invest so much time and so many resources into supporting people, especially in the education setting, and that's really wonderful. But one of the things that's always really striking to me is we spend so much time talking about our students in comparison or in contrast to the amount of time that we spend talking to our students. So how can we become more person-centered sooner in the process? How can we incorporate that person into the planning for their own experiences, for their own life? And I think this person-centered approach is really essential to establishing initial plans and modifying things as the individual gains more experiences over time and again determines what works for them and maybe what doesn't work quite as well. There are some wonderful resources out there with regard to person-centered approaches to transition. In New Jersey, which is where I work, we have a wonderful program called PCAST that's available to schools and also to caregivers. You can get information through Rutgers Boggs Center, and that's included in our resource handout. And it really helps you to shift the question from what what do we want to do for this person, right? So like, you know, to the question of what does this person want for themselves? So instead of thinking all the time about what's important for this person, we start thinking about what's important to this person. And we can do this in informal and formal ways, gathering information about interests, about strengths, about areas of support needs, about all kinds of things by setting up opportunities for people to be exposed, to practice different things, but then also just by having conversations with people about, again, what matters to them, what their own personal goals are, what their plans are, their dreams for the future, and incorporating that information, not just incorporating it, but keeping it at the center of what we do in whatever ways that we can. So when you think about your own child or student, or maybe a colleague that you're supporting, think about how can you invite them to the conversation as early as possible and in a way that's developmentally appropriate and meaningful for them and to them. I've mentioned a couple of times already the importance of starting early. So we want to begin with the end in mind. We want to be thinking about transition long before the transition occurs. So as soon as a child starts school, we already want to think about what's going to happen when they age out of eligibility, or age out of entitlement and into the eligibility system. So we want to start with that in mind, and understanding, of course, that over time that plan will shift and change. But if it's something that we're always thinking about, we're probably going to be more intentional about cultivating opportunities for the individual to build skills, have different kinds of experiences that support the transition process. It's also just going to help us as individuals who are assisting others to be better prepared, to feel, you know, more confident in what comes next and what we're doing if we're thinking about this from very early on. I highly recommend that when you are either looking for programs to support students or young people, or if you are providing those kinds of supports, that the focus always be on how can I foster the greatest degree of independence possible. So every time that you add a support to a program, think about how you're going to fade that support out. This becomes especially important when it comes to one-on-one supports. Now, I know very well that there are many students that do need one-on-one support in a classroom setting to be able to access the curriculum to the fullest extent possible, to access the full benefit of school, which also has to do with social experiences. And I understand that that's essential at times for some of our students. One of the things that's often very difficult about this shift from school to adult worlds is that in the adult services world, the one-on-one aid is not something that's typically available. So it's really important to think about how can I decrease reliance on those really individualized kinds of supports, or how do I provide an alternative kind of support in a different setting. So again, whenever you're adding something, think about fading it out. And it's not just about access to that support, it's also really about helping this individual become as independent as they possibly can. So we really want to be looking at how do we build skills, all different kinds of skills. And I understand, of course, this is the purpose of school, right? To build academic skills. We also want to mindfully approach the way that we build social skills and things like soft skills that become critical later in life in the workplace. So soft skills are those non-technical aspects of the job world. There are oftentimes a lot of the implicit sort of rules that need to be really explicitly and directly taught, especially to students with additional support needs. So things like time management, you know, relationships with colleagues, those kinds of things we really need to provide a lot of practice and experience with, and start doing those things as early as possible. And another thing that we want to think about is how do we provide, as soon as possible in programming, how do we provide different opportunities to explore different sorts of post-secondary options, career options, academic options. How do we provide opportunities for individuals to really engage with that information and then have those experiences by doing things such as, job shadowing, internships, community-based work experiences, on-campus work experiences. And one of the things that we can do with students beginning in elementary school is something called community-based instruction. And we have some great resources available in the handout. So this is where we have students learn about their communities in a meaningful, intentional, sustained way. So these aren't field trips. This is about going out and exploring your community as part of your educational curricula. So looking at the different options available when it comes to vocation, recreation, those kinds of things. So we can start exposing students to a lot of these principles very young. And then as they get closer to the age of transition, right, when formal transition planning begins at 14 as they approach, then we want to make those experiences a lot more specific to the student and more structured and more, post-secondary oriented. Another important thing that you can do to facilitate the transition process is to get connected. So it's so important to have a community that you can go to get support, to get information, to talk with. Some of the best ideas that I've heard, or some of the best insights, have come from conversations I've had with colleagues like John, for example, and other individuals that I've had the opportunity to work with at Next for Autism. So you really want to get connected to some resources that are in your local community and that are also part of a broader, maybe national community. This is great, again, to help assist you with feeling connected, supported, help with the particulars of planning. And also this is a way to connect with local and national advocacy efforts. So we do know that there's a substantial funding disparity between school and adult programming. And this is something that many state level and national level groups have been working with the government on, advocating to try to increase the funding options available for adult services. And so that work is certainly something that you could connect with as well. And we have some great resources in the handout to direct you to places that you could check out. You also want to, another advantage of being connected to the community is you want to get the facts. So as I mentioned, there are some excellent resources out there that will give you lots of information about how specific ways to prepare for the transition into adult services. Now, every state is a little bit different. And since we are anticipating having audience members from many different states, we didn't want to provide any specifics, but I will say that there's a link to some resources from Autism Speaks, and Autism Speaks actually provides a timeline for transition planning for each state. So that's a wonderful resource. So you want to get all the information that you could possibly need to start preparing for this transition. And again, I would recommend that you start looking at some of this information even when your child is in elementary school, just to familiarize yourself with what the process might be like. In New Jersey, we also have some resources that provide free webinars. So the Centers for Independent Learning are one example, and also ARC. Provides some free webinars and trainings, and really wonderful. They refer to them as go bags that give you step-by-step instructions about, how do I apply for these various services or apply to various entities when my child is getting ready to age out of educational services. So you want to make sure you get all of that information that's available. Another important strategy as part of this process is really understanding where you are in the planning process and embracing it and being really honest with yourself about where you are. It's so important to just meet the situation where it's at. There's certainly no turning back, and you have to just continue to move forward. And undoubtedly, by connecting to resources and supports, you will be able to get all the things in place that you need to help, yourself or your child or your student have a meaningful adult, life experience. And one of the things about embracing where you are that's really important for planning is being really honest about your child or your student's functioning when you fill out assessments. So for example, in New Jersey, we have something called the NJCAT that's part of the assessment eligibility process for adult services. And I encourage you that when you fill out any of those assessments or questionnaires, even as part of the IEP reevaluation process, really think about your child or your student and whether or not they are able to do something completely independently. When we're thinking about programming and planning, for the most part, we always want to think about our children and students from a strength-based perspective. What can they do? We don't want to come from the place of what can't they do. When it comes to completing these assessments, we really do want to operate a little bit differently. And again, think about what are they able to do completely independently. Think about, could they accomplish this task or demonstrate this skill if there was nobody there to prompt them, if there was nobody there to give them any reinforcement or reminders or guidance? What would that look like? And this is so important because those eligibility assessments are used to determine the level of support that your child or you as an individual will receive through the adult services programs. So it's just really, really critical to be very, very clear about where things currently stand with regard to current independent skill demonstration. And then, of course, we want to take all of this information and create a vision for the future. So we use all the stuff that we learn about an individual's interests, strengths, plans, goals, dreams, their current support needs, and we create different plans. Again, it varies depending state by state. And we know that we start transition planning at age 14. And the transition planning, again, becomes more specific, more experience-oriented as the individual, gets older. So for example, one example of that is that once an individual is 16 or older, they can participate in something called structured learning experiences, which are can be either paid or unpaid work experiences. And that's something that, it will provide them with the opportunity to try work either on the school-based setting or outside with an employer. So we want to make sure, again, that this vision for the future also considers what makes a meaningful life. So, not just about, of course, skill development, but things like, what do they want to do after they age out of educational services? Do they want to continue to pursue education? Do they want to work? What will their independent living skills look like? How will they be able to participate in the community for things like recreation and accessing different sorts of public services and resources? What's the plan with regard to finances? So should you consider something like a trust or an ABLE account? And deciding what their transportation is going to look like. How are they going to get to the places that they want to go to in the community, either as part of a formal program or just to get around and go bowling, go to the movies, things like that. Where will they live? So you need to plan for that. And then, of course, thinking about decision making. What kind of support does this individual need when it comes to making important life decisions? Do they need a lot of support, and perhaps you should consider partial or full guardianship as their, as their parent or caregiver? Or are they able to participate in decision making? And you might want to look at something like, supported decision making process. So all of these things are part of that planning that you want to consider. And again, with the adult services, you will have to look to different entities at the state level or community level to meet those different support plans and needs. So it is a lot of different things to put together, but again, you will have individuals to assist you with the process, and it does allow you to create something that really is customized to either, again, yourself, your child, or your student, so that they can access what they need. And of course, you have to expect that things will not remain the same. The plan will change, especially if you start very early. People's interests change, people's skill sets change, and everybody goes through, I shouldn't say everybody, but many people go through numerous job and career changes as part of their normal lifespan development in adulthood. So you have to expect the same thing for any individual that you're doing transition planning for. This is the plan for now, but we're going to be flexible and growth oriented, and we can make shifts and adjustment as things evolve over time. So thank you for your attention. I hope that you've walked away with a couple of different strategies that you can use with regard to preparing for that cliff, so that it doesn't seem like so much of an obstacle and instead seems like an opportunity to help you create a plan for a meaningful life for yourself, your child, or your student. I'm going to now turn it over to John so that he can share with you how you can send questions to us.
Dr. Taylor, thank you so much. That information was incredible. That was such a wonderful presentation. I learned so much. Thank you. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have questions, and so as you're watching this, if you haven't already typed questions in, I'm going to give you just a few moments to do so now, and we will receive your questions. And on April 7th, Dr. Taylor and I will be launching a follow-up Q&A session where we will respond to the questions that you have in a 30-minute follow-up webinar session. If we don't answer your questions during that session, just know that we'll be in touch with you. So maybe your question was very specific to you. We'll touch base and we'll get in contact with you and hopefully be able to answer your question. But for the rest of you, keep an eye out for that information about that follow-up webinar. We're very excited. And like I said at the beginning, your input is incredibly important to us. This topic is about you. It's about your child. It's about the person you support. And really what we're here to do is be ambassadors for the complexity of this transition and provide information that makes that complex transition a little bit easier, a little bit easier to navigate. So Dr. Taylor, I want to thank you for presenting. Those of you who are watching, I want to thank you for watching. If you'd like to reach out to Dr. Taylor, her email address is available here. So dtaylor@spectrum360.org. If you'd like more information about Spectrum 360 or would like to ask Dr. Taylor questions directly, feel free to contact her there. Remember, please, before you sign off, to download the handout if you haven't already. There's a lot of really good information on there. And if for some reason you have a technical issue with that, touch base with us and we will make sure you can get that. And then if you're willing, we'd love for you to sign up for our email list, both at Spectrum 360 and Next for Autism, so you can receive information about what we're doing, projects we're working on, resources we're providing. And then lastly, there is going to be a survey that launches at the close of this webinar. So we ask that you please fill it out, because if you haven't figured out already from us mentioning it several times and doing a follow-up session, your input is really important. It's very helpful for us to figure out the type of content that you want, the type of content that can be helpful. So help us create useful, meaningful material for you by filling out that survey. Again, Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for presenting today. You did an amazing job. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.